and I'm here to welcome you to the 7th Annual World Aquatic Animal Day. This year, the theme is The Human Gaze, Impacts on Aquatic Animals. And just to let you know, in a lovely coincidence, today is also the first annual Jane Goodall Day. So we'll be tethered in a nice symmetry from here on out. Look. So our panel today is From Objects to Subjects, Transforming the Way We See and Treat Aquatic Life. We have an amazing keynote speaker, Joanne McArthur, and fabulous scholars and advocates, Amy P. Wilson, Randall Abate, and Lori Marino. I'm Kathy Hessler. I'm your moderator. I'm the Assistant Dean of the Animal Law Program here at GW Law School. And on behalf of GW, I welcome folks who are in person and the folks who are online. Our panel will consider how the fields of law, science, and photojournalism see aquatic animals and what that means for them. But first, a couple logistics. For our folks in the room, please continue to enjoy the food. For our online attendees, feel free to put questions in the Q&A, and we'll be doing questions at the end of all the presentations. Recordings of today's panel and of the new panel will be on the GW Animal Law YouTube channel, and we have an Aquatic Animal Law playlist for you. We'll put links in the chat for the online people. I want to thank my colleagues on the Planning Committee, Amy Wilson, Hannah DeBolsi, Miranda Eisen, and Lori Marino. I also want to thank our co-sponsors. So it's sponsored by the GW Law Animal Program, the Whale Sanctuary Project, Farm Sanctuary, and the GW chapter of Animal Legal Defense. So I'm going to do some short bios for our amazing people. I could go on and on and on about each and every one of them. But I'll start with Joanne McArthur, who's a photojournalist, an award-winning photojournalist, sought-after speaker, photo editor, and president and founder of We Animals. If you haven't seen that, you really should see that. She's visited over 60 countries to document our fraught relationship with animals and is the author of 3 books, We Animals, Captive, and Hidden Animals in the Anthropocene. Joanne is the subject of the acclaimed Canadian documentary, The Ghosts in Our Machine. And her photographs have received accolades, including Wildlife Photographer of the Year, Nature Photographer of the Year, Big Picture, Picture of the Year International, the Global Peace Award, and others. Joanne enjoys jurying photo competitions and has done so for World Press Photo, Big Picture, and others. And she hails from Toronto, Canada. So we welcome Joanne. Thank you. Next, we have Amy P. Wilson, who's the Executive Director and co-founder of Animal Law Reform South Africa. Amy focuses on the intersection of the rights of humans, animals, and nature in law and policy, and creative approaches to inclusive justice systems. Her organization is the country's first dedicated animal law nonprofit. She's a research associate, lecturer, and doctoral candidate at the University of Johannesburg, and a senior adjunct lecturer at the University of the Western Cape. She consults with the Aquatic Animal Law Project at the George Washington University Law School, and she is an independent expert with the UN in Harmony with Nature program. She's also a founding steering committee member of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature Africa. She's the first South African to graduate with a master's degree in animal law and has authored many articles and book chapters, and is currently co-authoring a book on aquatic animal law and co-editing the first animal law book in South Africa. Amy also co-taught the first animal law course in South Africa. Next, we have, thank you. Yeah, we're delighted to have them. They're all very accomplished, and like I said, I could go on. So next, we have Randall Abate. Professor Abate is a research associate and special advisor for law and justice at Ocean Nexus, and a visiting scholar at the Environmental Law Institute. He's currently teaching environmental law at the University of Maryland, College Park, and animal law at the University of Miami School of Law. He's co-teaching Envisioning a Compassionate Food System for Humans, Animals, and the Environment at GW, and serving as the Hoff Visiting Scholar at the Elizabeth Hoff School of Law at Pace University. He served as Assistant Dean for the Environmental Law Program at GW from 2022 to 2025. Previously, he's held teaching positions at 6 U.S. law schools and 1 university. With a primary focus on climate change, law, and justice, Randy has lectured and taught courses on environmental law and animal law topics in more than 25 countries on 6 continents, and has published 6 books and more than 40 law review articles. Book generous.
I'm fun with you.
And last but certainly not least is Dr. Lori Marino, who's the president of the Whale Sanctuary Project, Director of the Camilla Center for Scholarship-Based Animal Advocacy, and co-director of the Animal Law and Science Project here at GW Law School. Lori is a Dr. Marino is a comparative neuroscientist who has studied brain evolution and behavior in dolphins and whales, primates, and other species for more than 35 years. She's an expert on wild animal captivity issues. Lori is currently an adjunct faculty member in animal studies at New York University. She's published over 150 peer-reviewed scientific papers, magazine articles, and book chapters on topics from animal ethics to self-awareness and other animals, and so on. And recently, Lori has become the recipient of the SETI Institute 2026 Drake Report for pioneering research in the evolution of intelligence. The committee said she is an example of how science can guide us towards deeper, more responsible relationships with all forms of life on Earth. And I think that's a really wonderful way for us to begin our presentation. So thank you to you all, and I'll call up Kathy. Thank you.
Hi everyone, it's so wonderful to be with you today on World Aquatic Animal Day. Really appreciate you coming out on a Friday afternoon, also to everyone online. So I'm really just going to give you a brief introduction to World Aquatic Animal Day, what it is, and just kind of give us a framing lens for some of our discussions. My presentation is called Seeing Differently, Exploring the Invisibility of Aquatic Beings Beyond the Human Gaze.
No, that one doesn't work.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but thank you.
Hopefully everyone can hear me fine. Okay, so World Aquatic Animal Day, or WAD as we like to call it, is an annual day dedicated to aquatic animals. We started it back in 2020, so this is now the 7th year. Dean Hessler and I co-founded it together with students that we were working with as part of the Animal Law Clinic and the Aquatic Animal Law Initiative back at Lewis and Clark Law School. And yeah, it's really grown into an amazing global event. It's recognized by bodies like the World Organization for Animal Health, and people have really taken up the idea and are doing incredible things with it. And the reason that we decided to create this day was because we saw a gap in advocacy, and we saw that there was an urgent need to make these creatures visible, right? To raise awareness of the threats that they face, how we use and impact them, to give them proper consideration, and a call for action for people to protect them, whether it's through law, advocacy, science, research, whatever tools you have, and also to celebrate them, recognize them as individuals for who they are, right? And every year we have a different theme. This year it's the human gaze. And like the name suggests, it's very much a human-centered lens, how we look at them, how we see them, and how this impacts how we subsequently use them, treat them, exploit them, commodify them, or protect them. And unfortunately, aquatic animals, all animals are underprotected, but aquatic animals are particularly underprotected. They are disproportionately considered and impacted, including in our legal system. And this means that trillions, it's tough to imagine what that actually means, but trillions of them are killed every single year and impacted by humans. And the human gaze is never neutral. And today we're calling on people to explore that and see what that means when it comes to the other beings that we share our beautiful blue planet with. So I'm using the term a lot, aquatic animals, and I think everybody has a perception and understanding of what that is. And most people might tend to default to fishes or whales, polar bears, dolphins, some of the charismatic megafauna even. But aquatic animals are a huge variety of species and different types. These are animals who live in or by water. They include amphibians, crustaceans, finfishes, marine mammals, mollusks, echinoderms, aquatic insects, cephalopods, reptiles, the Cnidaria, porifera, water birds, and various others. So as you can see, there's so many animals included in the concept of who they are. And the reason we think it's important to say this is because once we understand who they are, we can see them more clearly in different contexts in which they exist. And why do they matter? Well, through our human anthropocentric lens, we think that they matter for us and to us for various reasons I'll go into in a second. They matter, of course, to the environment in which they exist. They perform functions for the environment. They give us oxygen and various other things. But really focusing on today is the animal-centric lens, right? These animals matter for themselves. They have intrinsic value as individuals. They have value as a species. They exist in a species. They also exist as part of multi-species communities. They have friends, they have families, they coordinate with other species and do things together. They help each other hunt, they do all sorts of really cool things. Unfortunately, though, again, the lens that we place on them is how we use and see them. And this is for the reasons that they exist to us, for food, or even as feed for other animals. We use them for their skins or their fur. We put them in tanks and we use them for entertainment purposes, or we keep them as companions or pets in our homes. Some of them are work animals, dolphins, sniffing out bombs. We use them in science. We use them in medicine, or we take them as vitamins. Sometimes we use them in education. We use them for their beauty or as decorations in our home. Sometimes we think of them as pests. Sometimes we use them in cultural ceremonies and religious practices. Other times we consider them in wildlife or in the wild, in various other ways. And in each of these circumstances, aquatic animals receive different levels of protection, including in our law. For example, food animals and farmed animals traditionally receive a lot less protection. Another way that we might start to think and reimagine our relationship with aquatic animals is that we tend to think of them in some ways as a solution. So humans have problems, for example, in the context of food insecurity. We see them as a solution to feed our human population and are pushing things like the blue economy and blue foods. We also see them as an alternative. So recognizing that the things we're doing to terrestrial animals have impacts on the environment and on those animals. We are seeing a shift away from, for example, farming terrestrial animals towards more aquacultural practices and even wild caught fishing. We see them as a resource. We consider them to be limitless in some ways because we often see them in big groups. We also consider them as better than terrestrial animals in some ways. So they might be healthier to consume. It's healthy to eat fish, for example, or it's much more sustainable. And I use those inverted commas lightly. Importantly, though, they are different to us. They don't have faces, they don't scream out in pain, sometimes some of them do, but in the same way that we do. And because of that, we have for the longest time questioned their capacities, their intelligence, their sentience, their ability to feel both negative and positive emotions. So all of these things we hope to highlight today and ask you yourself to question. And the other part of it is that they are invisible to us. They exist underwater in spaces that we don't tend to inhabit, unlike terrestrial animals, which we see walking down the street. So again, part of today is raising that visibility and talking about how we see them. And one way we see them is literally as seafood, right? We call these animals seafood. We don't call land animals land food. When we see them, we see food. Just trying to look for a picture of a shrimp for my presentation, I was shocked to find that only one of the pictures that came up immediately was actually of a live shrimp, right? As opposed to if you had to look for another type of animal, you would actually see a live animal. And these kind of biases are being perpetuated, including through now our use of AI. As you can see, I asked an AI to generate a picture of a salmon jumping in a river, not even using a real salmon, right? Thinking of salmon purely as food. In the last few minutes, I just wanted to highlight a very brief example of how pearls are a symbol of the human gaze. And we might try to, well, when we think of pearls, think of them as a luxury item, as purity, all sorts of different feelings that come up. But I want us to kind of focus a little bit in on this as an issue that many people don't think about in animals who are also quite invisible. So the jewelry market was valued last year at about 14 billion, and it's expected to grow to about 31 billion in the next couple of years. And while it's actually impossible to know how many animals are impacted and how many pearls are produced, because there's really no proper data and reporting, estimates are that about 3,000 tons of pearls are produced. So imagine how many that could constitute if you think of how heavy a ton is. And based on those estimates, again, some are higher, some are lower, that's approximately 6.1 billion pearls. Just to put it into perspective, while most of the production happens in China, French Polynesia, Indonesia, Japan, Australia, the Philippines, and others, it's still an important way to think about aquatic animals. And thinking about the harms that they produce, we often don't think about animals like oysters, right? There's even a specific category of vegans who only eat oysters. But a pearl, in its essence, is a bivalve response to foreign stimuli entering their shell, literally opening them up, pushing something inside them to stimulate production, right? A foreign object. And it can take between 6 months and 10 years to create a single pearl. There are all different kinds of pearls. There's freshwater, there's various kinds of species, but just imagine how long that is in the context of the animal's life. Harvesting pearls by its nature is done by, once again, opening up the shell and stabbing the animal and pulling it out. Sometimes they die, sometimes it's done in a more delicate way. Either way, it's going to cause stress or death. Ultimately, all of these animals are killed. And again, we tend to think of these animals as very different to ourselves because they don't have brains, but what they do have is complex biological systems. They have hearts, they have mouths, they have stomachs, and they have groups of nerves which react to their body. There wasn't a time so long ago where we didn't think other animals were like us, like octopuses, right? Now, the more we learn about science, the more we realize those animals are like us. But again, that test of using ourselves is problematic. So I say we should take that precautionary approach where we don't know, let's try and do the least possible harm. And if the animal harm wasn't enough, there's a tremendous potential for environmental harms in terms of habitat destruction for the farming itself, water pollution, plastics pollution, diseases, and nutrient overloads. So I'm not going to go into too much more, but I just wanted to kind of start that discussion because it's an issue that I've been doing aquatic work for many, many years now, and one that I haven't even delved into, but just another way, another kind of animal that we fail to see in a context where we fail to see the harm that we do. So Carl Jung said, the more we see ourselves in animals, the more obvious it becomes that they deserve compassion just like us. And while I don't dispute that, I think that even if we cannot see ourselves in animals or certain animals, is that really the test? Animals are unique in their own individual ways. They are special, completely separate from humans. And perhaps one of the greatest barriers for aquatic animals may not be that we fail to see ourselves in them, but that we fail to see them for who they truly are. So today I encourage you in going forward to help transform your perception from seeing these animals as invisible to making them visible, from changing our curiosity to one geared towards responsibility, moving from exploitation to empathy, moving away from thinking of them from products to persons, and hopefully, ultimately one day, moving away from objects to subjects. So thank you very much, and happy World Aquatic Animal Day.
Amy, you packed so much into that talk. I learned so much. And I was also thinking about photos that could accompany something that we could do together. I mentioned photos because at We Animals, my organization, we have a stock platform of over 40,000 images that people can use for their animal advocacy. Didn't think I was going to start my presentation with that, but yes, I did. Okay, here we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for inviting me. And congratulations on creating a day for aquatic animals. That's fantastic. So needed, so necessary. So my talk is called From the Shallows, a photojournalist perspective on people and aquatic life. Oh. Ooh. Okay, take this here. Just a moment. Okay, good. So in this presentation, I'll share photos of the literal and metaphorical shadows where human desire and aquatic life collide. I'm an animal photojournalist who has documented our fraught relationship with animals in over 60 countries now. And it's interesting that you've invited me here to speak about aquatic life, though I don't do underwater photography. And there's a long history of that kind of very important work that has educated millions of people about life below the sea. But that's not my specialty. My specialty is to document the animals we bring above land, really where they shouldn't be. We know that about 2/3 of the earth is covered with water, and that's a lot of life that we can't see. If you guys want to sit there so you can see the presentation, I'd love for you to see the presentation, see the photos. That was my regret with your talk, Amy. Watching. So yeah, the world is, approximately 2/3 with water, and so there's a lot of life under there that we can't see. And I'd also say that photojournalism is very much about uncovering what we can't see. So from industrial fishing on land and within the seas to large-scale slaughter of aquatic life to our plates, our cameras connect us with who is unnecessarily exploited for our taste. We often think of fish together, a school of fish. We visualize them swimming together in the ocean, or we see them together in aquaria, in films, or on ice. But they are individuals. And as the philosopher Tom Reagan said, they are subjects of a life. We need to always remember that they are individuals. We bring them to the shallows so we can see them, but in doing so, we make their true lives invisible. It's uncanny that the closer we bring them to us, the less we see them. We might feel that we're getting to know our singular fish in their tiny glass tank, but that is a projection. You can't get to know a betta fish swimming in a small tank the way you can't get to know a prisoner who's in isolation. I believe it's the same thing with dolphin therapy. That's what you're seeing here in Eastern Europe. Though we're getting so close to them, it's interesting that we just keep getting as close as we can to them, but not really seeing them. As you said, this is a very anthropocentric service that we're doing. We may say we're getting close to nature. We may say that this is, like this, but it's not. It is innovative, but at a huge cost to the other than human animal. It seems that wherever I encounter aquatic life, I'm once again documenting how our gaze remains stubbornly anthropocentric. Whether we're consuming aquatic life as a resource or as a spectacle or as a marketing gimmick, on the right, you have a kind of wedding photography. People like to get married, have birthday parties, do engagement shoots at aquariums. We remain blind to the sentient individuals within them. I love visual journalism and storytelling because they act as catalysts for cultural change, exposing both systems and animals hidden beneath the waves and behind the glass. Storytelling is really difficult, though, I have to say, and I want you to look at this image because I think it's one of the best images we have of the animals, taken by Lily Agostina, and because it tells a whole story. I think so anyway. It's also why photojournalists like a wide angle. We like to get in and get close. And I think this is a very good picture because it shows an individual looking out at you, looking into the lens, and so looking out at you. We get to connect with the fish, which is so rare. And we have a system. We have a fish farm. And then we have us. We have a worker. And we always need to remember that fish are suffering because of the systems we have created. So why care about fishes? I think we all know. We have an unfathomable effect on their lives And I think we have different data. The number I found was that we pull up about 171 billion fin fish every year, just the fin fish. But we should care about them because they are sentient, they are complex, and we have ample and exciting proof to show that. They have self-awareness. Many fish pass the mirror test, showing that they recognize themselves in reflections. They communicate, of course they do. Some fish talk via electrical pulses. I like this, even adjusting their voice frequencies so they don't talk over their neighbors. Amazing. We have seen that they cooperate. They have interspecies friendships. They are pleasure seeking, problem solving. They have long-term memory. You know that old thing about, goldfish memory? No way. They show optimism and pessimism. They show joy and deception. They show joy and deception. They experience joy and they deceive, just like us. Now, what are you looking at here? This is a shrimp farm. Each year, we kill up to 620 billion shrimp. We just cannot feel that number, and same thing with people. We can't even feel it with people in war zones and refugees. We certainly can't feel it with animals, and we certainly can't feel it with shrimp. We're really, really at the beginning of starting to have understanding, empathy for these animals, and taking action for them. All of us in this room, I'm glad you're here. We are at the beginning of doing this thing for them. So this is an aerial view of aquaculture ponds that spread to the horizon in India's largest fish and shrimp producing state. In recent decades, thousands of hectares of agricultural lands, mangroves, and forests in the region have been converted to aquafarms. Aquafarms are also bad obviously they're bad for fish, but they're also bad for the environment. Here we have what is called a fish kill in North Carolina. I was there photographing the effects of Hurricane, which one, Florence? And as a result of the pollution and the runoff from the farms, which went into the lakes, it caused the death of tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of fish in this wild fish in this lake. I think that caring about fish should extend to caring about humanity as well. This is a fisherman in Indonesia who is now supplementing his income by collecting recyclable materials in the area in which he fishes. What a picture. I'm not supporting fishing by saying that, but I just think it's really, really interesting. And I care about what we're teaching each other, especially children. When we teach warped ways of caring, warped ways of appreciating aquatic life. So this is a touch tank. I believe this is exploitative, and I think that it keeps us thinking that animals are objects and not subjects. At We Animals, we ask people, I'll start by saying, at We Animals, we want to create sparks on people's journeys towards more compassion. And I want to tell you about one of my sparks when it came to fish. This is long ago, in the early aughts, I saw this film. Actually, it's a book by Farley Mowat called Sea of Slaughter. They made it into a documentary. And it was the end of the film that made me into a vegetarian instantly. So what happens is the film ends on the east coast of Canada, where it's fall and it's the herring are spawning. And during that time, they suck up about 80,000 tons of herring from the sea. 80,000 tons, not 80,000 fish. 80,000 tons. Now the herring aren't worth much, but the roe, their eggs, is, and that's why they're pulling them up from the sea. And then the film cuts to these animals being sliced open for their roe, and of course about half of them don't have any roe because they're male, and so they're thrown into the trash. Then the females are cut open, their eggs are removed, and they're thrown into the trash. Some of these animals are made into fish meal, but for the most part, they are actually dumped into landfill. And I'm going to see if this plays, because I'm going to show you just, like 5 seconds of what that looked like. We are talking about seeing, so I'm going to see if, look at that. This is why we need to see. It's so shocking that that is what we're doing. Okay, I want to share another spark on my journey. The opposite of being completely disgusted by how we're treating masses of fishes, but a lone fish. I was in Cuba. I was staying at someone's house, and she had lots of captive animals, including this tiny fish. And I looked and looked at the fish who seemed to be dying. And I asked her about the fish, is the fish dying? And she said, oh, he's been like that for years. Many of you may have heard of Kiska, known as the loneliest orca in the world. The first time I saw her, I was shocked that she lived alone in this barren tank, but I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to tell her story. This is her floating in the middle of her barren tank. And so I put on my journalism hat. That's something I love about being a photojournalist, is the research side of things. And I learned a lot about her. I learned that when she was 3, she was wild caught off the coast of Iceland with some other podmates, young podmates, and one of them went on to be named Keiko, who was featured in Free Willy. But she was brought to marine land, and her podmates died one by one, very prematurely. She gave birth 5 times, and all of her cats died within about 5 years. I can't think of a more depressing and lonely life than being pulled from the wild and having everyone around you die. And from 2011 until the time of her death in 2023, when she was 47, she lived alone. And this is a fairly ordinary picture. I think, everyone was taking the same kind of pictures that I was. And there wasn't, a lot of opportunity to take something fascinating, but it's these details that we need to know about the individual's lives we're ruining. And that brings this image to life. And also what I find interesting about this picture is that we're pointing, and we're taught that pointing is impolite and that you only point at objects. Now, speaking of pointing, let's go into the swim with dolphin industry. When I was here in Florida taking these pictures at this fancy hotel, one of the staff said she was so blessed to work with dolphins and people to bring them closer to nature. But I think that the price tags on these swim with dolphin experiences tell the better story. You can see here $125 for 15 minutes. Or you can even learn to be a dolphin trainer, which I'm sorry is ridiculous, for a nice price tag of $3,250. Pulling back a little bit, here's a picture of what that place looked like. They call it a natural setting in an enchanted lagoon. And a lawyer I know referred to it as a sleazy lagoon, which I will never forget. It's totally a sleazy lagoon. But what I find most interesting and heartbreaking is that these dolphins on the left are living about 50 meters away from their natural habitat. So what do you see in this photograph? Look closely, look very closely. One of the dolphins is obese. He's given Prozac to treat his depression. Dolphins gain weight from the lethargy caused by captivity, and the weight gain is also a side effect of SSRIs. It's quite common for aquatic animals to be given psychoactive drugs to curb their depression. And many aquatic animals are also caught in the wild. We know that Kiska was, and I want you to know that many are. For example, this shark, who was pulled up from the waters of Florida to be brought to Canada, to this tiny tank where he swims. We need to know these things. We can't just, look at the picture. We need to know what's behind the picture. We need to think about our actions. Those are the things that create change. What toll does it take on them to have so little room? This is a Baltic gray seal, and these seals usually forage at about 30 to 70 meters deep, and they can dive as deep as 300 meters, which is about 1,000 feet. I find that lifesaver floating there in the water just so ironic. And also interesting is that though he is at the center of the scene, we are meant to be looking at him. Nobody is looking at him, and certainly no one is seeing him. In the biological depths, these species are evolved to inhabit versus the shallow existence of their captivity. I see a stark paradox. The more we try to tame domestic lives, the less we see them. So through my camera, I expose time and time again that our relationships with fishes, aquatic life, are shallow, temporary, and unnecessary. Take a look at this picture. What's strange about it? Well, you're seeing a fish who's been caught. The fish is in the net. But what's strange? This is a pool. There's a pool in the background. And this is something that Toronto does. It's an annual event. My home is Toronto. And this is a way of bringing nature to the city. So they take fish and they dump thousands of them into a pool so that underprivileged children can have an experience with nature. Okay, and this is Ink Floyd. Ink Floyd was wild caught, and he's on display in an aquarium in British Columbia. Now, what I like about this picture is that it's not just a tourist picture. It's taken by someone, Cynthia Hughes, who cares about animals and wanted to make a statement by taking the picture. And we are seeing more and more of that. Fewer tourist pictures of octopuses and animals in aquariums, and more images that are taken to challenge the status quo. Okay, I want to talk a bit about innovation. This is where my hope lies. And there are a lot of things happening. I'm going to name a few of them and helping aquatic life. So through conservation and direct action to protect aquatic life, I was on a boat in the Antarctic with Sea Shepherd for a couple of months, and we were intervening with the whale hunts, and we saved an estimated 500 whales that year through those interventions. And there's more and more harm-free ecotourism, more encouragement to hunt animals with our cameras instead of fishing rods and guns. The new wave of films, get it? Wave? So the new wave of films, of course, we know Seaspiracy and Blackfish and My Octopus Teacher, incredible films, but there are more and more short films, innovative films. Have any of you seen Wild Salmon? Okay, that's your homework for this weekend. It's a 15-minute film. It's my new favorite film, Wild Salmon. What does it do? It uses mixed media to go right to our empathy. And they do that by showing us as the salmon. So you can see we look like salmon, it's like a human, but it's salmon. And we go through all of their experiences in the wild, from birth to death, in fish farms, at the fish markets. It's an incredible film. The clean culinary revolution. Well, we know there are a lot more efforts to create not just different kinds of plant-based meats, but also fishes and salmon and crab and all this, and they're pretty tasty. So food technology is rapidly decoupling seafood from the sea. On the left, we have plant-based salmon. And on the right, we have cell-grown salmon made by a company called Wildtype. The end of fish feed and a move towards microalgae. I think we're just very much at the beginning of this. So we grind up billions of wild sardines, anchovies, herring, mackerel, and other species to feed farmed salmon. So that's wild. We're doing it to feed pets, and we're doing it to feed mink, who are farmed for the fashion industry. So totally and completely unnecessary. What you're seeing on top of that mink cage is fish meal. And so now precision fermentation allows us to grow omega-3 rich microalgae in labs, providing the same nutrients without touching the oceans. Talk about innovation. Just 1 ton of microalgae-based oil can replace omega-3s for 30 tons, from 30 tons of wild-caught fish. The power of collective voice. We can't underestimate holding signs, going out into the streets, making your voice known, speaking up, inspiring other people. That's how culture shifts. One of the ways culture shifts. So this creates a reputation risk for the companies we're protesting against, which can eventually force them to evolve or to exit. And I include this image as well because these were people protesting specifically a fish market called Billingsgate in London. Innovation past exploitation. So by replacing live animal shows with human artistry and breathtaking, or rather breath-holding technology, we prove that wonder doesn't require a captive subject. So I was documenting all the cruelties at SeaWorld, and I almost missed this. And these were underwater performances by people who could hold their breath for many, many, many minutes. And I got this really crappy picture, but I had to include it. Innovation. There's magic in all sorts of spectacles. The spectacles don't have to be at the cost of animals. The birth of sanctuaries. I don't have photos of the whale project. I don't have photos of what I'm going to. Well, I looked at your website and I was like, no. I'm just going to put a nice picture of the ocean and the sunset. And I hope that Dr. Lori Marino will speak a little bit about the whale project today. If not, you can ask her afterwards. Okay. And yes, we're going to have eventually, slowly, more places to retire animals who've been held by us unfairly and wrongly. Wrapping up, I'll also mention digital encounters. This was so exciting. So the Detroit Zoo is quite innovative. They have rescued tens of thousands of animals. And they're finding different ways for us to have animal experiences without the animals. So they have the Shackleton boat, and it's interactive. You can go down into the boat. They have the portholes, and you can look through the portholes. And there's water splashing on you, and there's sounds, and there's smells. And you look through the portholes, and there are animals swimming around. But it's digital. It's still as exciting. And it's probably even more exciting because they're not keeping an orca, in this little tank so that we can watch them swim in circles. So there's just, we innovated ourselves into this mass fishing and into all these terrible things we do to animals, but we can innovate ourselves out of it. Do you think? Do you think we can? I hope we can. Well, my conclusion, my cri de coeur, is a call to seeing aquatic life by using our intellectual and empathetic depths. From objects to subjects, we must refuse the curated magic of the tank, the swim with dolphins activities, our blind appetites, and the industrial erasure of sea life, ensuring that our fascination no longer forces sentient beings to live and die in the shallows. Thank you. There's a couple of QR codes here if you're interested in following the animals.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for the invitation, for being a part of this wonderful, distinguished panel. It's a pleasure to, as I say, get outside the box of being a lawyer and law professor and participate in kind of interdisciplinary perspectives on issues as important as aquatic animals. And it's so inspiring to hear Joanne and Amy give that incredibly informative, inspiring landscape of the lives of aquatic animals. I'm going to do what I do and put a legal lens on this and hopefully pick up with the theme that Joanne offered, which is the innovation and moving away from the status quo and seeing what the law can do to enrich and protect aquatic animals in a much better way than we have with our anthropocentric lens that the legal system has. So I want to share with you a new space in the law called rights of nature. It's a very exciting place that's going on right now, especially for someone like me, a career environmental lawyer and law professor, and having spent most of my career working within the anthropocentric framework that environmental law is, seeing this radical paradigm shift going on is really exciting for me, and I see tremendous opportunity for protecting aquatic animals more effectively through the rights of nature lens. So I want to give you just a little bit of a background of what rights of nature is all about, where it's taking place, how it's taking place, and then drill down into the animal, the aquatic animal focus that is emerging lately, and give you 3 case studies of very unique and important aquatic animals that are benefiting from rights of nature protections: sea turtles, southern resident orcas, and salmon. So basically, rights of nature turns the anthropocentric paradigm on its head. So basically, environmental law in the US and around the world has its foundation in building on this human view of why the environment is valuable. We are not protecting the environment because it has inherent value. We are protecting the environment to protect ourselves from the way we're harming the environment. That's environmental law in a nutshell. And so that's been the past half century, 50 years now of US environmental laws that are built around that premise, that the only traditional US environmental law that doesn't work from that proposition is the Endangered Species Act. And not surprisingly, that's been wildly controversial since it was enacted. So basically, rights of nature recognizes the inherent value of elements of nature, whether we're talking about a river or a mountain or aquatic animals. And so we move away from that managed exploitation model, and we look to put the needs of the elements of nature first. So it's really quite powerful. And this has been going on a long time outside the US. Leaders in this space, Ecuador built rights of nature into its constitution. Bolivia, Panama, New Zealand with rights of nature protections in their legislation. And of late, Colombia has been very ambitious through using the judiciary to enact rights of nature protections. There have been many tribal initiatives in this regard as well. Salmon and wild rice being conferred with rights of nature protections in some indigenous communities. At the local level, we've seen lots of rights of nature ordinances protecting things like watersheds and other local environmental interests. But not surprisingly, whenever there's a good idea happening and there's a paradigm shift about to unfold, the inevitable backlash happens. And we're already seeing that rights of nature is gaining traction. And so we're now seeing states intervene preemptively and say, that's not allowed. We're not going to allow local rights of nature ordinances. They're just fundamentally not permitted. So we're seeing that Florida, one of those states, enacted that legislation a few years ago. So we're seeing an increasing focus on the marine environment, which is very encouraging with these rights of nature efforts. Rights of coral reefs, Costa Rica. And so I always kind of pose this question because it comes up all the time. Are these objectives incompatible? We are simultaneously seeing 2 really positive revolutions in environmental law. One is rights of nature. The other is an increasing interest in the human right to a clean and healthy environment. And that reminds me of ever since I added animal law to my repertoire of what I teach and write about, oftentimes the first question I get is, why do you hate people? No, it's possible to love animals and people, believe it or not. So I always pose this question when I talk about this context, because a lot of times it seems like the zero-sum game, that if we are promoting rights of nature, somehow we're undermining a human right to a clean and healthy environment, that you can't have both at the same time. that's absurd, but it's something we have to confront. And so, very encouragingly, recently, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in a major climate change advisory opinion actually recognized that fundamental compatibility of upholding rights of nature and upholding the human right to a clean and healthy environment. And that's very important in moving us forward now. So in terms of the aquatic animal context, rights of sea turtles, a really important development in Panama. And this is the first national level rights of nature protection for an aquatic animal. And it came shortly after Panama had national level rights of nature legislation, which is very encouraging to see that momentum building in this way. And it's not an accident that sea turtles were selected for rights of nature protection, and not an accident that it was in Panama. So this is an incredibly important imperiled aquatic species. 5 of the 7 world's sea turtle species nest or migrate on Panama's coasts. And Panama is essentially a stronghold for the survival of these species on a global basis. So this effort makes a lot of sense. And so what's interesting about this effort is that it's not your traditional rights of nature. If you can say traditional rights of nature, hasn't been around that long, but most rights of nature efforts are quite aspirational in tone. It's not known for its kind of implementation mechanisms, and that's the next challenge that rights of nature faces, is that we can all embrace what those words stand for, but what does it mean to enforce rights of nature protections? They're very different from traditional environmental law protections. So this is unique in how it does provide a roadmap for how to implement the protections for these sea turtles in Panama, calling for particular governmental responses to ensure that the rights of nature, rights of sea turtle protections are upheld. And here, the rights of southern resident orcas, another unique aquatic animal species that has attracted a lot of attention for good reason, again, because it's so severely decimated, very much like the sea turtle populations that are getting the benefit of that protection in Panama. This started at the local level. So municipal ordinances, then we saw counties and tribes adopting similar protections for southern resident orcas in rights of nature framework. And these species face multiple threats in where they are in the Pacific Northwest. First and foremost, there's an interconnected threat to salmon. Salmon are in decline, and these southern resident orcas rely on that, primarily on that declining population of Chinook salmon. They are imperiled by underwater noise and toxic contamination. And ultimately, the rights of nature protections are really this idea of a last resort measure, that when you get a population that's as low in number as this population is, basically any kind of traditional environmental law measure is not going to be good enough, it's going to be too little too late. And so this idea of putting their interests first and recognizing the importance that the intrinsic value they have, the importance they play as ecosystem keystone species is something that's built into this protection, and it's quite encouraging. And it's also incredibly important to raise the awareness of the value of this species when we talk about what we were learning about in previous presentations today about the trying to put an end to the captive breeding, how wrong the captive breeding is. Rights of nature ordinances help elevate that awareness of just how important these species are and help propel those efforts to eliminate captive breeding. And I have to comment that I do have an orca costume like you see in this picture of the celebrating the passage of one of these ordinances. And I wore it for Halloween when my granddaughter was about 5, and I remember her saying in perhaps disbelief and fear, "Grandpa Randy, please take that one." I was trying to be, a source of entertainment, and freaked her out and scared her all at the same time. So I've played that down a little bit. I'm just wearing a fish tie today, so I wanted to maintain an aquatic theme anyway. So salmon is another species, aquatic species that's been getting attention and protection in a rights of nature framework. And this is an interesting twist on it because for me, I've always struggled with that balance that I mentioned before, this idea of upholding human rights simultaneously with upholding rights of nature, protection of species. And in that context, I also do work in protecting indigenous people's rights. And so this is a space where I feel like we have an opportunity for a win-win. When we're talking about rights of nature protections for salmon, this is, of course, very important for the species itself, but it's also very important for these Native American communities that so fundamentally rely on salmon as part of their cultural and spiritual identity. They look upon salmon as like a deity. And so this is very, very important that in protecting this species, we are seeing a victory both for the environment, the species itself, and the human communities that rely on it. And that was actually the foundation of a lawsuit that a tribe in the Pacific Northwest brought against the city of Seattle. And part of their legal theory was that advocating for rights of nature recognition for salmon, as well as an effort to remove dams that are ultimately limiting the viability, the ability to survive that these salmon should be granted, blocking their migration. And ultimately, it was a successful outcome. This idea of recognizing the rights of salmon and the rights of the community to protect these salmon led to a settlement that implemented fish passage to better protect the species. And so I want to conclude on the note of work I'm doing more recently. It's this new area called ocean equity. And this is where I really revisit that win-win idea that the way environmental protection typically works is that we exploit and exploit and exploit, and then we say, whoops, this is almost gone. You know, it's the water quality is decimated, the species is practically extinct. And then we come in and say, you can't do anything now to this resource. We're going to put this moratorium, this ban on any kind of use of that resource. And that always sounded like a good idea to me as an environmentalist. But then as I got into ocean equity work, I became more aware of the fact that that's uplifting something and degrading something else. So there are human communities that rely very intrinsically on those resources. And it shouldn't be don't touch it is the solution. It should be recognizing the rights of those traditional stewards of those resources that were not the ones to push that resource to extinction. In fact, even though they use the resource, they are actually the best stewards for the resource because they rely on it so in such an interconnected, symbiotic way that you can trust these communities for maintaining populations of a resource that's in decline. And so in many ways, the law has a solution for this kind of reality, and that's the anti-subordination principle that we apply in anti-discrimination law. Basically, when a population of humans has been exploited to a degree and their rights have been deprived for so long, we try to put that paradigm on its head. And an example of that would be affirmative action to reverse race and gender discrimination, for instance. That kind of approach does come into play here and would be useful in thinking about how to put the needs of indigenous and coastal communities first in maintaining populations of these resources in conjunction with a rights of nature framework that can protect the species and protect these communities' rights at the same time. So there are many more things I can say about that. I want to be respectful of the time I've been allotted, so I want to wrap up here, but I really look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me here. It's always a pleasure. Today, I want to talk about dolphin and whale captive entertainment. I've studied dolphins and whales now for about 35 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about what I think is going on and put that in the context of how looking at these animals as entertainment is affecting how we see them, how we treat them, and a lot of what Joanne talked about as well. Dolphins and whales in captivity are forced to perform unnatural behaviors in artificial, impoverished environments, tanks, while an audience gawks at their wow. They live on display with essentially no capacity to exercise choice as to what happens to them, as to whether they are viewed by another species or not. On the right, you see a beluga whale with his mouth open. And you see a lot of photos like that. And the kids are delighted. They think that he's laughing. That is an open mouth threat display. When a dolphin or whale does that, they're not happy. They're telling you, get out of my face. Now, the fact is that what dolphins and whales endure in captive entertainment facilities is very much like what all non-human beings endure. So I'm going to talk about this in a more general way than just for dolphins and whales, because zoos, marine parks, aquariums are all the same in terms of what happens to the beings in them. Whether you're a chimpanzee, an elephant, whether you're dead or alive. And we can remember the incident of Marius, the giraffe, who was considered surplus in the zoo that he was in. He was killed and chopped up and fed to the other animals in front of children. Okay, talk about objectification. Just the other day, there was a news story about a chimpanzee who was being taunted at the glass window. He took a running jump and he cracked the exhibit's glass at the Memphis Zoo. Okay, this happens quite a bit. And I want you to remember what zoos are, where they come from, and what they're really about. There was a time not too long ago, the early part of last century, where there were human beings in zoos. These human beings were indigenous people, people from Africa, people from Asia, anybody who was considered different. They were put in zoos, and they sometimes occupied the same display area as other animals. And although the zoo and aquarium industry does not want you to remember that this is where they started from, we will not forget. So today I want to talk about zoological voyeurism. What's voyeurism? Gaining pleasure by watching an individual engaged in private behaviors. It includes gawking, ogling, staring, invading privacy, controlling, objectifying. And zoological voyeurism is enjoyment from looking at other animals without regard for their permission or desires. And it includes gawking, pointing, okay? You don't point at a person, you point at an object, calling and jeering at other animals who cannot escape, compelling other animals to behave in unnatural ways for our pleasure. Think of the dolphin jumping through the hoop. Watching other animals during times that are intimate and private, like nursing, sexual or affiliative behavior, napping, etc. And maintaining presence and noise when the other animal is clearly in distress. All of these things happen to captive dolphins and whales and other animals in the zoo. And I like what Joanne said about the fact that the more you stare at them, the less you see them. The more you do this, the more invisible they become. Now, the zoo argument is very clear. They want you to think that seeing animals on display leads to learning, appreciation, and therefore conservation. Well, there is very little support for this claim. And many of the species kept as zoos and aquariums, like dolphins, are not endangered. So they're putting forth a claim for which there is essentially no evidence, and they want you to buy into it. What actually does happen when you go to see a dolphin or whale in a tank or another being in a zoo? Well, the first thing that happens is it reduces them to visual objects. And all the things I'm talking about are its effects upon the humans. In other words, when you go to see a dolphin show, you are being exposed to something that's promoting their objectification. And that objectification turns back against the animal. Okay? So unfortunately, the way we view other animals has a profound effect upon what happens to them in their lives. And I will talk about direct effects of visitors on the other animals as well. But for now, this is more of a notion of what is actually happening when you go to SeaWorld. Ralph A. Campora, who's a psychologist who has studied captive animals and has called dolphin shows zoo pornography, says precisely because they are unable to elude the gaze of others, to associate or refuse to associate with human beings, they are prevented from living the lives they are supposed to have. So here again, they are prevented from living the life of a dolphin. When you go to see a dolphin show, it contextualizes the dolphin or any other animal in an anthropocentric relation with us. Randy talked about the fact that environmental law has been anthropocentric forever, right? We're trying to break out of that. But basically, when you go to a captive entertainment facility where there are wild animals, the message is clear. The message is, I can control whoever is on display because I get to lead, they don't. And it reinforces an anthropocentric relationship to them. And we know what that does to the other animals. And of course, when you go to see shows where people are riding on top of these animals, I've seen trainers being lifted out of the water on the rostrum of a beluga whale. And then there's the swim programs where these poor dolphins are asked to give a ride to anybody who can afford to pay a few $100s to swim with a dolphin, or anybody who is convinced that if their child swims with a dolphin, that they won't have any problems anymore, that it's therapy. All of that is a big scam. But what all of that does, just like this picture, it just reinforces the idea of control over another being for our desires. Stephen Keller, famous social psychologist, said most people, and he did a lot of empirical research on this, so it's not just his impression, he did a lot of published studies. Most people leave the zoo more convinced than ever of human superiority over the natural world. It's exactly the opposite of what the zoo claims they are doing. Going to see these animals weakens our ability to feel empathy and concern for other animals in general. If you know that you can go see an orca by just driving a couple of hours, what does that do to your awareness of their wild counterparts? What does that do to your understanding of what's actually happening in the real world? What the aquarium and the marine park is telling you is that they're all okay. And at the same time, you'll go there and they'll throw the conservation message at you. Oh, these animals are ambassadors for their species, right? And they hope that you buy that. Another person who's done a lot of incredible work in this area about zoos and what it does to human psychology is Randy Abate. And he wrote a book called Reading Zoos that I recommend. It's just all about zoological voyeurism. And it's really a thick book, but I'm telling you, it's searing. It's so interesting and insightful. And he said the predominant effect of zoos is to make animals easily and conveniently available to us, visible to us easily and on our terms. We presume that this ease of access implies their prosperity, their endurance. We hear whispers that animals are in trouble, that we're destroying their world, that extinction rates are skyrocketing, and we don't want to believe it. So we create a tableau vivant that disguises the reality. We go to a zoo, and there they all are, and the implicit messages don't work. What are the societal repercussions of zoological voyeurism? Well, first of all, continuing incarceration and exploitation of these animals. We are in a time now where a lot of dolphinariums and marine parks holding dolphins and whales are closing down, thankfully. Canada, France, Belgium, Mexico, they're falling like dominoes. And that is a fantastic thing. But in Asia, in China, and in Japan, it's going up. So it's not uniform across the world. In China, there are something like 100 marine parks. 100. And they all have to have orcas and dolphins and belugas and so on. And everyone has to swim with them and do these spectacular shows. So depending upon where you live, the situation is getting better or it's getting worse. We have wild animals as pets. Of course, nobody has an orca as a pet, but they do have other wild animals. And going to a zoo and seeing them, especially when they're led around on a leash for these ambassador programs, it leads you to think that, hey, I can have a tiger on a leash too. And we all know what that does. And the fact of the matter is extinction rates are rising precipitously. We've had zoos, aquariums, marine parks for so many decades, and it has done nothing, absolutely nothing, to conserve any animals anywhere. The extinction rates for mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, amphibians is through the roof. And so when you look at a chart like this, you realize that the whole zoo equation is false. There is nothing that they are doing that is contributing to conserving animals in the wild. How can we neutralize against the harmful effects of zoological voyeurism? Well, obviously, don't go to these places that exploit other animals. That's a big one, right? But if you end up there, or if your children go on a class trip or something, there are things you can do to try to neutralize or inoculate against the zoo message. Counteract the captivity narrative with information and experiences about wild animals in the wild. So, show films or provide books and magazine articles about who dolphins and whales actually are. Because when you go to see a dolphin in a dolphin show, that's not what a dolphin is. If you go, question everything. And if you go with a child, allow them to question. Don't try to make it all sweet and nice for them. They have a question about why that dolphin is hit his head against the side of the tank, or why that gorilla is eating his own poop. Tell them why. Tell them it's because they are stressed out from being forced to live in a zoo environment. Go to sanctuaries and places of real conservation and education. The Whale Sanctuary Project is creating a sanctuary for captive orcas and beluga whales in Nova Scotia. We hope to open next year. And there are other such facilities that are about to open up. And what we hope is that sanctuaries become an alternative to going to see animals on display. Because sanctuary is not a place where you can buy a ticket and ogle at an animal. It is all about the animals themselves. Use language that respects the personhood of other animals. It's not an it, it's a he or she. And answer children's questions with facts. Again, don't be afraid to let your children know that these animals are not happy in the zoo. Effects on individual animals. Well, the majority of studies on this topic, known as the visitor effect, has concluded that the effects of visitors on animal behavior and welfare is generally negative. Okay, so the effects of having a crowd of people around you. One thing that you see is avoidance, an increase in hiding behavior, an increase in distancing from visitors, an increase in aggression, as that great ape, that chimpanzee cracked the glass. And we see this a lot with dolphins and whales because of the loud noises of people cheering in the stands and stomping with the feet and the loud music and the fireworks really causes them a lot of stress. You see change in activity, a higher frequency of stereotypies, repetitive abnormal behaviors, lower frequency of play, foraging, grooming, so it inhibits them. And there are studies who have shown that there are higher stress hormone levels with more exposure to visitors. Now, a few studies suggest a positive impact, but the overwhelming majority show that being an animal of any kind in a zoo, on display, in a tank, is stressful and negative. For dolphins, we have very, very few studies of visitor effects. There's only been 2. One shows that dolphins in swim programs tend to increase their use of the refuge more. In other words, when they know that people are around to get in the water with them and swim with them, they tend to go into the smaller tank or try to get away. And another one, which is more difficult to interpret, is they increase their range of activity after a swim program. And that could simply be because they are just all, kept up. They're, they could be stressed. There's a number of reasons. So I guess my point here is that when you think about going to see captive animals and what we're actually doing, we are truly engaged in a form of voyeurism that has incredibly harmful effects, not only for the animal, but for the next generation kids that are coming up and their behavior when they get to be adults is going to then affect the animals. So it's a circular cycle of harm, and we have to break it. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'll call the panelists up to table and we'll start some Q&A. And if you want me with the slide, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for this tremendous panel. I have so many thoughts in my head, but I want to start and see if there's some questions in the audience. We have a couple online, but yeah, it's just really started.
I have a couple comments. Joanne, you were mentioning different films that you would recommend. Have you heard of the film The Last Dive?
The Last Dive?
The Last Dive.
No.
I saw it recently at the Environmental Film Festival about a person who lived in Mexico and befriended the manta ray.
Yes.
And I highly recommend that.
Okay. The Last Dive.
Yeah.
It just played here in DC at the Environmental Festival.
Yeah. And he was instrumental in getting protection there for the manta.
Right.
Not yet a comment on worries. I just happened to turn on the very end of ABC News tonight when David Murr was giving a verbal award to San Diego Zoo for their protection of the African elephants. I was just so horrified. A letter to ABC.
There are tremendous parallels between what elephants and orcas and other cetaceans endure in captivity. Really, we've written papers about it. They're both kinds of animals do very, very poorly in captivity.
He was specifically saying how they were doing a great job at conservation. Yeah.
It's just a throwaway line. There's no evidence.
And usually those things are compared to what, right? Other
Right.
people who are doing a worse job, not compared to what the animals eat, right? Yeah.
from what they went through to get there.
Right.
If you're interested, next month in May, we have a case against the Johannesburg Zoo to try and get the 3 elephants that are currently there released into a rewilding facility. So you might be hearing about that, hopefully. Some good news.
Yes, it will be the first of its kind in Africa.
Yeah.
That's great.
A question for anyone who's asking for a comment on safaris. I understand it's different because the animals are in their own environments, or going up to see the great lakes in the jungle, and if there's any information also on the impact of the animals when these jeeps and cars and such go through their environment.
I'm
So
sorry,
photo
can
safari?
repeat or,
So yeah, the impact on the animals of photo safaris, when people go into
photo
the
safaris.
habitats of animals with all kinds of.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, a lot of it, and then I think Joanne would have also something to say. Photo safaris can be kind of okay, but it depends upon how they're conducted. You know, it's like whale watching. You know, there are some people who operate in a respectful manner towards the whales, and there are others who do not. And so it's really, really, you have to really kind of look at the actual operation and the company that's promoting it in order to see what how they conduct their business. So you can't say blanket, it's all bad or it's all good.
Okay, yeah, I mean, similar to what Laurie said, I do think it definitely depends on the operators. I will say that it's definitely less harmful because the animals can generally escape from the situation. But that being said, there are some that I've seen where they do chase animals around and they take them. On the other side of that, obviously, is that ecotourism is much less harmful than consumptive use tourism, right? So, for example, in South Africa, we have a huge tourism industry. A lot of people come shoot animals, kill them, trophy hunting, and a lot of other people come to see them in natural habitats. I will say out of those two, obviously ecotourism, photo safaris are a much less harmful way and still stimulate GDP and allow for people to have livelihoods. But again, they're not all equal. So I don't know if there's an easy answer to that.
I might add, I just might add, I have been on these very curious about what it's like for the animals, but it's interesting what it's like for we animals as well. I think we go literally to the ends of the earth and out into the oceans and into faraway exotic places to have natural experiences. And I think some of the most interesting photos I have from a safari are of 30 trucks surrounding, you know, a couple of animals. So what is it? Is it really fulfilling what our hopes and dreams are for, you know, feeling more wild and natural?
And it's useful, I think, to just adding to that, to think of the structural realities, right? So even if you have a tour company who's trying to behave as ethically as they can, we're talking about road building, right? And building parks and building hotels and building, you know, out in places where they don't really belong, and thinking about the pollution and, you know, our trash and the noise and all kinds of, and even light pollution. And so I know that some of these parks will actually build right next to water holes for animals, right? And they'll have lights up so that the tourists can see the animals at night as they're coming to the water holes. So the design, right, of these, if we need to be able to see these animals and they're not in the zoo, right, that we're in the spaces where they need to be. And so we're encroaching on their ability to migrate and to communicate with one another and things like that. So I think the work that our panel is doing, and also at GMU, we have an Animals and Tourism project with Carol Klein, trying to think about these issues. And so I'm glad you raised it, right? There's no easy answers, but these are exactly the kinds of things, conversations we should be having. Yeah.
I really appreciate that question because I asked that question about recreational scuba diving. I mean, in the end, I used to be a diver, but in the end, none of this is necessary. It's all going to consume, you know, energy. It's going to all harm. It's all going to cause harm. It's going to harm the coral. It's going to harm the water is going, we can use oil to do all this fun stuff. I mean, vegan cruises, there's such a thing as a vegan cruise, plant-based cruise. I mean, a cruise could cause harm. I mean, it was terrible harm. And so, I think, it basically none of this is necessary. And we could justify it, by saying like, we travel to Asia, or you still, flying, you can justify it, I say it's by, so I really appreciate that question, because I've been having, people think I'm an extremist when I mention this, but I feel like none of it's necessary.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
I have a question for Lori and Emily. Do you think that what zoos are doing is evil under any and all circumstances, or would you make any exceptions? Like when the zoo claims that there are only 5 individuals left in the world and they are trying to save them from being totally extinct.
There are about a handful of species who have been saved by efforts in zoos. Literally, maybe 5 to 10. So we should acknowledge those that, captive breeding. There is the Kozlowski's horse and the black-footed ferret, California condor, and a few others. But the overall argument doesn't hold any water. The overall argument applied in general to holding the vast majority of animals that they hold, it doesn't apply. There is no evidence that, for instance, having people see elephants in zoos contributes to conservation. In fact, elephants are highly endangered, and we've been looking at them in zoos for decades. So when exactly is this great conservation ethic supposed to kick in? It doesn't. The strength of the implicit message of a zoo or a theme park or aquarium is anti-conservation. And there have been literally only about a handful of real conservation successes with zoos.
I'll just add, one of the questions you can ask in assessing this is, if we're trying to conserve these animals, are they going back into their natural habitat? And if they're not going back into their natural habitats, we're not conserving them. And part of the reason some of the animals are facing endangerment or extinction is because we're destroying their natural habitats. So even if we were to conserve a few animals, right, if we can't let them live where they live, then we are really saving them, right? The Smithsonian Museum has a conservation center in Virginia, and one of the animals they were trying to conserve was the orange-maned tiger, which they then bred with other animals, right? Because there weren't enough orange-maned tigers, which the offspring didn't any longer have orange manes, right? And so it's just like bizarre what we're trying to do. And why are we trying to do that rather than to save the animals in their natural habitats, right? And save their habitats. So I will say that there are a couple of zoos in the country that are rescuing animals who have been injured in the wild, rehabilitating them and releasing them. And that is different than what we're talking about. Generally speaking, those animals are what they call off exhibit, because they don't want those animals to be habituated to human beings, right? And so in those instances, if it's a rescue, rehabilitation, and release, then the zoos are serving a useful function. And they could be educating people about that work more than I think they are. Did other people want to comment on that?
Well, I would just say, SeaWorld, for instance, does a lot of rescuing. They really do. They rescue sea turtles, they rescue pinnipeds, they rescue a lot of animals. But you don't go to SeaWorld to see those animals. You go to SeaWorld to see orcas. And that's the problem. They do, but those are not their big ticket items.
So I'm going to take one online and then we'll come back to you. Thank you. So this, I think, is relating to, Randy, one of the parts of your presentation asking, aren't the rights of salmon really more to benefit humans who have traditionally exploited them? And I think that's with reference to protecting the salmon in the trust.
Well, I wouldn't use the word exploit. So basically, when we look at the stressors of exploitation for fisheries in general and salmon in particular, they are facing multiple pressures, and certainly commercial pressures is one, just traditional pollution pressures. And ultimately, there was not that sense of stress when they were being sustainably managed by the communities that rely on them and interface with them. That was sustainable management and not exploitation. So the rights of nature enabling those species to be better managed by the traditional stewards of those species actually is a good conservation model. It would trouble me if they were just being preserved so we could have them more exploited by Mrs. Paul's for dinner. So I mean that's just not what's happening.
And here I think we probably want to distinguish conservation of the species versus treatment of the individual animals. So the individual animals who are dying, right. Are being exploited, I think, in that term. They're being used for human purposes, and they're not happy, right? But in terms of conservation of the species and management in that way, right? So two different kind of goals that are at odds.
Yes, and though I still think there's room for compatibility with those goals. I mean, if you think about how rights of nature was used as a platform for cases in Latin America recently, the Estrellita case, the woolly monkey, and the Run the Fox case in Peru, it was animal rights activists would have preferred to see, okay, we're respecting the rights of individual animals, and that's the goal we want, and that's the means we use to get there. But the law isn't quite there yet, and so I think using rights of nature as a mechanism for bettering the lives of animals, even though it's not the lens that is fully respecting them as individuals, hopefully we'll get there. It's an intermediate step.
Challenge for animal advocates. I feel like many of them are not speaking plain English and are not thinking about the psychology behind zoos. Zoos are a safe outdoor experience for families. It's entertainment. And to me, to say you can't have it, you're taking something away. We've got to, I mean, and I know that there are various kinds of concepts and things like that. But I think a lot of what we talk about is sort of, it's kind of high flown, and families are looking for some place to go with their kids, and they can be outdoors and they can run around and stuff. And I think we need to think more about getting the public on our side. And it's interesting to me because in past years, I was involved with elephant issues for about a dozen years and with sanctuaries, and zoos co-opted the language of sanctuaries.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they did.
But without actually changing it.
Right.
And I think we need more people, sort of a rapid response. I mean, I'm frustrated at the National Zoo. There's a fairly new elephant calf who was rejected by her mother. And so all the pictures of her are all just zookeepers around her. There's another elephant who's being sort of an allo mother, but we've got their elephants divided into different groups, and we need to be able to talk about it in very everyday plain language and say, look at that. And I think, I used to go stand at the zoo at the elephant exhibit and play alternative curator or something, or docent. And I would start asking people questions, say, and people, they see it. It's just that they need to have what's right in front of their eyes pointed out to them. And so I would love to see, like with this elephant calf, you've got obviously dysfunctional elephants giving birth to other elephants are going to be dysfunctional. And we need to get this message out more and into more common language. So that's just my, I'm just hearing my.
Yeah.
Reactions.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Yeah.
as an educator, to follow on what she was stating, there is a positive mix with this. There will never be a completely fairy tale set for anything we do for observation on planet Earth. However, I use the analogy of you cannot know human anatomy without having conducted an autopsy. A cadaver is a cadaver. As the human being, there are people that say that you shan't touch a body out of whole. However, you need to know the mechanics of it. When it comes to living species and observation for young people in an environment that they are seeing the animal respected, it leads to conflict. It leads to sustainability. It leads to this individual terminology that you all have been using throughout the entirety of this presentation. So I think this yin and yang that I've been exposed to today is very beneficial. But I don't want to think that we are coming out of this as stating we are doing something wrong, but observing in captivity these animals. And out of our search for environmental correction because of climate change, I say now is more important than ever. That we figure out how the mechanics of these environments work, that they're being displaced from, where it is that we can relocate them, how we can bring them, we can keep them so they don't go into extinction. So there's a happy dance that we have to do, but I don't want the feeling that there is something innately wrong with observation by captivity, if that makes sense.
Well, I would say it is wrong. It is wrong to take an animal who is not domesticated, who's wild by nature, and confine them.
That's gonna respond before Lori does.
Concept of services. We control we bring wild animals up close, we control them, we can see them. And the problem is when you see an animal out in its environment, you're not seeing the real animal. You're not seeing, and then you know, at a zoo, you don't know what you're looking at. When you watch the nature documentary and you've got someone pointing things out, then you learn, and then you see. But zoo, and especially when you stand, you see people stand there seconds at a time, you know.
Maybe I'm spoiled because I've read animals at a zoo before. I mean, and I've done this at farms and all kinds of things. I'm a driver and it's a lot. So maybe it's skewed vision. However, for my urban children, say for instance, schools in Baltimore, these children would not know what a cat from a hole in the wall would be without having opportunities for real observation. Not everybody has National Geographic capability, but you do get a picture.
I mean, it's an interesting point in how we educate ourselves and our children, right? And so, interestingly, early days when I was talking to people about we don't have enough scientific data about elephants, person in the animal movement said we have a ton. I said, no, we have a ton on captive elephants. And that's not who elephants are. We are misunderstanding their biology. So to your point earlier, right? We are misunderstanding capacities. We are misunderstanding and we're miseducating, right? So the very fact of having animals in captivity teaches our children that captivity is okay. So for those people who don't agree with captivity, then that's a lesson we don't want to teach. For people who think that that problem is offset by other benefits, then that's a choice that they can make, right? But so we're going to be in different places, but we do need to understand the miseducation. I've been to zoos where I've done my own sort of education of the people there, and I'll see people say, "Oh, look at the rhino." I'm like, "That's not a rhino." That's like they literally don't even know what the animal is, right? And they're talking to their children or what have you. So the miseducation, I think, is really problematic. And the idea that we're reinforcing, one, that captivity is okay, two, that that's who those animals are, that the way they're behaving and the way we're seeing them is who they really are, which it's not. And that it is okay for us to privilege our desire for education or entertainment, right? Because zoos tend to be entertainment over their needs. Right. And I'll share with you really quickly that I've taught lots of students and some folks in urban settings, and I've actually had students think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows because they haven't had any exposure to cows. But we don't see the need necessarily to take the children to see the cows. So why? So some people will, right? But so why are we saying they need to see elephants, right? If we don't say they need to see some of these other things in their lives, right? So just raising some additional questions.
And I think there's very little education going on. So as educators, we should be concerned about the fact that when a child goes to a zoo, there's no evidence that they retain accurate information about that animal. It's entertainment. Is basically what it is. Zoos have been claiming that they do education. They call it edutainment for decades. And we really have, again, very little evidence for that. It's just not happening at the zoo.
And
So
we can continue to innovate by reformulating what zoos are. They can be places of compassionate conservation. They can be wildlife rehabilitation centers where you can go and actually not even see the animals, but hear people speak about what is being done to help them. Detroit Zoo, not a perfect place. I've mentioned it already, but they have rescued a lot of animals. And I really like I think it was their wolf exhibit. And there's a sign that says, "We hope you can't see the animals because that means we've done our job in giving them a habitat, that where they have privacy." That was pretty cool. Yeah. And those are rescued animals as well, animals who can't be rewilded. So there are all sorts of innovations we can undertake to make places educational and continue to evolve the physical spaces that we've built into something that benefits everyone.
I'm going to take a couple other questions. Yeah. There's a long list of online ones, so thank you. Hopefully we'll have time after. So one question is, if no sanctuaries are nearby, what is an effective approach to encouraging someone not to take their children to a zoo or a marine park? Feel to have some conversation.
Can you repeat the question?
So if there's no sanctuaries nearby, then what is an effective approach to encourage someone not to go to a zoo or a marine park instead?
Go to an IMAX.
Say more, please. Yeah.
Go to an immersive experience, IMAX, a film. And if people feel that they are hard done by because they can't see animals in person, it's a great learning opportunity to say, well, we don't have the right just to see them because we're fascinated by them and we want to see them. Just as tigers don't have the right to come and sit in our living rooms because they want to observe us. Yeah.
I'll add that I asked my students in the first class that I teach what is the most recent interaction they've had with an animal. And one of the things I have to often remind them is that as they've come to school, they've seen animals. They've seen birds. They've seen squirrels, right? And in DC, we're lucky we have heron and we have eagles and we have other animals. We have foxes and beavers. And if you don't notice them, if you don't look, then we don't see. Right. And so this is about the human gaze and about how we train ourselves to see or not see and who we choose to see and in what context. So I think there are other ways to help students or families enjoy the animals in the environment who are already there.
Yeah.
And not captivity.
I think at a sanctuary, if you go to a dolphin sanctuary, you're not going to ride on a dolphin. And that's something to teach the child, that dolphins are not on the planet for us to ride on them. And there's other ways they can see them from a distance using underwater cameras, etc. But the lesson of a sanctuary is very, very different than the lesson of a zoo or a marine park.
And this is a question that I think follows on what Joanna just said about that notice, but for you, Lori, when the Whale Sanctuary project opens, will there be paid or free public viewing? So at the sanctuary?
So we won't have gate receipts. We're not going to allow the public to come in and view the animals close up or touch them or feed them. There will be an interpretive center across the bay where we will have scopes for viewing, because viewing dolphins from a distance is what you're supposed to be doing. You're not supposed to be up close and personal with dolphins. They're wild animals. So that's what we will be doing. And I think we can do some really exciting educational stuff by not allowing the public to do all the crazy things they do with dolphins and whales in marine parks. I think it's an opportunity.
And this question is for you, Randy. Do you expect more kinship or relative lawsuits by other Indigenous people to be filed? And is there a hope that these lawsuits can finally get the humans and whales or salmon's inherent rights recognized?
I think it's certainly a growing trend in the transition between the first and second edition of my Climate Change and the Voiceless book. I think the number of tribal initiatives related to rights of nature for species probably increased by 4 or 5-fold in those 5 years. So I think it's certainly an encouraging trend, and I think based on the sovereignty that First Nations have, I think it's something that's a very good application of what they can do with their legal authority to do something that's good for the species, good for their relationship to the species.
So just to follow on from that, just to mention the case that we're doing with the zoo again, our third applicant is actually Chief Stephen Fritz of the Khoisan in South Africa, and his papers argue that keeping elephants in the zoo is against his cultural heritage and his right to culture as enshrined in our constitution, because the Khoi people actually believe that when elephants are unhappy and in captivity, the rain stops, and that's part of the reason that we are living in a perpetual drought. So there's an actual injury to the people by keeping elephants in captivity as well. So it kind of
connects all of those conversations together, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Are there other questions in the room before I take it? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just building on that, I'd love to know from both perspectives, how you potentially see small island nation and indigenous groups making more of an impact internationally, and whether or not we can expect to see that kind of thing work on orca personhood, recognition, but also even through the Ecocide Convention that we have had indigenous groups supporting that. I'd love to share your thoughts, what we can see in the international perspective.
Well, they both small island nations and indigenous peoples have had a tremendous impact on international legal movement in this space. So I think it's something that's been very positive, and many really exciting developments in that regard. And I think a lot of it also has to do with respecting a sense of place. And part of that is the marine environment and the relationship that these island nations and these indigenous communities have. And that's starting to connect to the idea of, in the climate migration context, the right to stay. And that's a big area of looking at climate governance, that this inevitability of island nations facing a potential need to move to survive. The initial response for the law in many instances is going to do everything it can to help those communities and those nations stay where they are, because they don't see a plan B. That this is where home is. This is where the relationship to their surroundings are, and it's something that's irreplaceable. And I think there's a lot the law can do to respect that in terms of those nations' relationship to their marine environments.
Good. No, I agree. I think really the rights of nature movement has been driven largely by indigenous peoples around the world and will continue to do that. So I see them having a tremendous impact. I think what's nice is combining, the indigenous perspectives with the legal minds and the scientific, I think it's all coming together beautifully. I'd like to see more of it, but yeah, I expect it to grow in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Hi, I'm just for Randy. Are all these native nations and indigenous people, are they all, is that a correct assumption? Are they all correctly stewarding? Are there some people who aren't correctly stewarding? Because I feel like there's this general assumption and counting on that they're all stewarding them.
Right. I mean, there's certainly the first way to be sensitive to native communities is that they are not all alike by any means, and so there are different ways that native peoples are engaging with their environment. I think compared to the non-native public, they are much more likely to be living closer to the land and in harmony with the ecosystems in which they reside compared to the rest of us. But that's not to say that they're all engaging in positive restorative relationships at all times with nature. I mean, that's just not going to be the case. Yeah.
And just to give you one example of that, in Canada, there's tribal communities that have sued the government to protect the waterways, to get aquaculture pens out of the waterways. And one of the folks there's a number of organizations and companies on the other side, and one of those is also a tribal organization that engages in net pen aquaculture in the water. So you have tribal communities on both sides of that singular debate. So just as an example, different people have different views. Yeah. Okay, we have time for maybe one or two other questions. So I'll go back to the online if there's, okay. So putting two things together, we've been talking about some of the harms of tourism. And so one comment is tourism can actually help protect animals who might otherwise be legally exploited. And I think, Amy, you were beginning to raise. And then what about the presence of the boats in the water in particular? And maybe, Joanne, you can talk a little bit about your experience in the water. Yeah, so Amy, do you want to start us with the tourism more generally?
So basically the ecotourism.
Yeah, that it's a way to actually potentially, if the alternative is lethal exploitation or consumptive use. Yeah.
I mean, that's something that we come up against in our work all the time, is that, trophy hunting contributes to local communities and it protects other animals. And the lion farming industry has said that farming lions protects wild lions because these bones are otherwise going to be exploited. And, I kind of similar view to Laurie, and I think it's all exploitation. I think it's all problematic. And I think that farming someone for their body parts doesn't save other animals. So I think it's a myth, and I understand that they are making money from it and it does generate GDP, but I think the mentality of it is problematic. So,
yeah. I think we've said before that these solutions aren't whole solutions. There might be ecotourism solutions, but they still pollute and create garbage, and one step at a time, I guess. But I like your point that we don't need to do any of these things, and we don't
come out. Those ones like just leave them alone.
Yeah, that's all.
Well, and I think we all, even in our efforts to protect animals, right, have to think about our own engagement and the consequences of our action. But that's kind of the point, right, for all of us to be thinking about this. And the point of this was to help us begin to see animals that we don't typically see, and to see them, right, now to recognize sort of that lens, the human lens, the gaze through which we tend to see them, which warps, right, our understanding of them. So because we're at time, I wanted to extend a huge thank you to our amazing panel. Your work is inspiring. We're grateful for your contributions today and always for advancing how we understand and protect animals. I also want to acknowledge our earlier panel. So if folks didn't get a chance to see that, it's called Unseen, Unprotected, and Underwater, Perspectives on Aquatic Animals. Both of these are recorded and will be put up on the GW Animal Law YouTube channel shortly. I wanted to thank everybody for joining us for the 7th annual World Aquatic Animal Day, and to let you know that our save the date's already out for the next annual World Aquatic Animal Day, the theme of which will be digital tides, emerging technologies, and aquatic animal futures. So I want to thank you all. Without you, this wouldn't have been possible. So thanks for your attendance and your engagement and your thoughts and work. And thank you again to our panel.
Thank you.